The ancient pines of Shadowmere Forest towered like cathedral spires, their branches weaving a canopy so thick that even noon felt like twilight. Maya's wheelchair caught on another root, sending her lurching forward as panic clawed at her chest. She'd been running from her past for 3 years, but now she was truly lost, miles from civilization with a dead phone and fading daylight. That's when she heard the growl. Not just any growl. This was the sound of apex predation, of something that had never known fear. Through the mist stepped a figure that made her blood freeze, tall, impossibly beautiful, with eyes like molten silver and fangs that caught what little light filtered through the trees. This was Kieran Blackthorne, the alpha vampire whose territory she'd unknowingly invaded. But Maya wasn't just some helpless human lost in the woods. She was Dr. Maya Chen, former CDC researcher who discovered something that could either save or destroy the supernatural world. And when Kieran scented what she truly was, his reaction wasn't what anyone would expect. Why would the most feared predator in North America kneel before a woman he'd never met? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's hands trembled as she gripped the wheels of her chair, every instinct screaming at her to flee even though she knew it was impossible. The vampire circled her slowly, his movements fluid as liquid mercury, each step deliberate and predatory. She could feel his gaze burning into her skin, analyzing, cataloging, hunting for weakness. "You smell of laboratories," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the forest floor. "Of sterile metal and secrets." He paused directly in front of her, those silver eyes narrowing. And something else, something that shouldn't exist. Maya forced herself to meet his stare, drawing on the steel that had carried her through years of medical research and personal tragedy. "If you're going to kill me, just get it over with." A smile curved his lips, revealing those deadly fangs more clearly. "Death would be merciful, but mercy isn't typically in my nature." He leaned closer, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his ethereal eyes. "Tell me, Dr. Chen, what were you really working on at the CDC before you disappeared?" Her blood turned to ice. He knew her name, knew about her past. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know everything that enters my territory, especially when that something carries the scent of Project Nightfall." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Project Nightfall was classified beyond top secret, buried so deep that even mentioning it was treason. Only a handful of people knew it existed, and most of them were dead. "That project was terminated," she whispered. "Was it?" Kieran straightened to his full imposing height, easily 6.5 feet of lean, dangerous muscle. "Because the serum you developed, the one that was supposed to create super soldiers, had some very interesting unintended side effects when it came to my kind." Maya's mind raced. The serum had been her life's work, a revolutionary treatment designed to enhance human cellular regeneration and physical capabilities. But the trials had gone catastrophically wrong. Subjects had died in ways that defied medical explanation, their bodies rejecting the treatment with violent, supernatural symptoms. That was when she'd realized the truth about what existed in the shadows. "The test subjects weren't all human," she said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "Some of them were vampires." "Very good, Doctor. Yes, 3 of my people volunteered for your trials, hoping your serum might free us from certain limitations of our nature." His expression darkened. "Instead, it nearly destroyed them. But in saving their lives, you did something unprecedented." "What do you mean?" Kieran moved behind her wheelchair, his hands gripping the handles. Maya tensed, ready to fight despite the futility of it. But instead of violence, he began pushing her deeper into the forest. "You developed an antidote," he said as they moved through the maze of trees. "A compound that could reverse the serum's effects and stabilize vampire physiology. What you didn't realize is that your antidote didn't just save them. It enhanced them beyond anything we thought possible." "That's impossible. I destroyed all my research before I left the CDC." "Did you?" His voice held a note of dark amusement. "Because someone has been manufacturing a bastardized version of your antidote and selling it on the supernatural black market. Vampires who take it become virtually unstoppable, but it's unstable. They're dying, Dr. Chen. Horribly." Maya felt the weight of revelation crushing down on her. "And you think I can fix it?" "I know you can. Because you're not just the creator of the original serum." They emerged into a clearing where an ancient stone mansion rose from the forest floor like something from a Gothic nightmare. "You're the only person who survived direct exposure to the perfected compound." He knelt beside her wheelchair then, those silver eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're not disabled by accident, Maya. You're transformed." The scent hit him like a physical blow. Warm honey mixed with fear and something else. Something that made his dead heart stutter in his chest. Kyle Thorne emerged from the shadows between two ancient oaks, his pale eyes fixed on the intruder who had somehow breached his territory's defenses. A woman sat frozen in a wheelchair on the forest path, her dark hair catching moonlight like spilled ink. She should have been easy prey, should have been nothing more than another trespasser to dispose of quickly and quietly. Instead, she looked up at him with defiant brown eyes that held no trace of the mindless terror he was accustomed to inspiring. "I know what you are," she said, her voice steady despite the rapid pulse he could hear thrumming beneath her skin. Kyle stepped closer, noting how she didn't flinch or try to flee. Couldn't flee, he realized, taking in the sleek lines of her chair, the way her legs remained perfectly still beneath a wool blanket. "Interesting. Do you?" He let his fangs extend slightly, a predatory smile curving his lips. "Then you know you're about to die." "Maybe." She tilted her chin up, studying him with an intensity that made something uncomfortable twist in his gut. "But you haven't killed me yet." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. Why hadn't he? Any other night, any other human, and their blood would already be painting the forest floor. But something about her made him pause, made the predator in him hesitate for the first time in over 2 centuries. "Maya Chen," she said when he didn't answer. "That's my name. I figure if you're going to kill me, you should at least know it. I don't care about your name." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. "Sure you don't." A ghost of a smile played at the corners of her mouth. "That's why you're still talking instead of ripping my throat out." Kyle moved with inhuman speed, appearing beside her chair in a blur of motion. His hand shot out to grip the armrest, bringing his face inches from hers. This close, her scent was intoxicating, warm and alive and utterly human. It should have triggered his bloodlust into overdrive. Instead, he found himself memorizing the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "You have no idea what I'm capable of," he growled. "Enlighten me." She didn't pull away, didn't show an ounce of fear despite having an apex predator looming over her. "You're obviously not just any vampire. The others were terrified of even speaking your name." "Others?" The word came out sharper than he intended. "The 3 who were hunting me before I crossed into your territory." Maya's expression darkened. "They said I'd witnessed something I shouldn't have. Said their master would be very unhappy if they let me live." Kyle's jaw clenched. He knew exactly which vampires she meant. Marcus Voss's lapdogs, rogues who had been testing the boundaries of his domain for weeks. They'd finally crossed a line by bringing their problems into his woods. "What did you see?" "A murder." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "I was out late, couldn't sleep, decided to take a ride through the city park. Thought maybe the fresh air would help with my insomnia." She gestured vaguely at her surroundings. "Ended up witnessing 3 very pale men drain some poor woman dry behind the botanical gardens. They spotted me before I could get away." "So, you fled here?" Wasn't a question. Seemed like the lesser of 2 evils at the time. She studied his face, searching for something, though I'm starting to wonder if I made the right choice. Before Kale could respond, the distant sound of breaking branches reached his enhanced hearing. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving fast through the underbrush. His uninvited guests had decided to pursue their prey after all, despite the clear warnings posted throughout his territory. Maya must have caught the change in his expression, because she glanced over her shoulder toward the approaching sounds. "Friends of yours?" "Hardly." Kyle straightened, his senses automatically cataloguing threats and escape routes. 3 vampires, maybe 4, still half a mile out but closing fast. They'd be here within minutes. He could leave her, should leave her. Let Marcus's people clean up their own mess while he retreated deeper into his domain. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. He hadn't survived this long by involving himself in other vampires' affairs or protecting random humans who wandered into his woods. But as he looked down at Maya, brave, stubborn Maya who faced down monsters with nothing but sharp wit and sharper courage, Kyle found himself making a decision that went against every survival instinct he'd honed over 2 centuries of existence. "Hold on," he said, moving behind her wheelchair. "What do you... trust me or die? Those are your options." Maya's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "I'm really hoping I don't regret this." As the first howl echoed through the forest behind them, Kyle began pushing her deeper into the darkness toward the heart of his territory where ancient protections still held power, where he might be able to keep them both alive long enough to figure out why saving this particular human felt like the most important thing he'd ever done. The cabin's interior defied every expectation Maya had formed during their silent journey through the woods. Where she'd imagined crude wooden walls and primitive furnishings, she instead found herself in a space that breathed understated elegance. Rich mahogany panels caught the warm glow of what appeared to be gas lighting, though she noticed no visible flames. Persian rugs in deep burgundies and midnight blues covered polished hardwood floors, and built-in bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling along one entire wall. Her wheelchair rolled silently across the threshold as Kieran guided her inside, his presence a constant shadow at her back. The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded final, like the last note of a song she'd never hear again. "You're staring," he observed, moving past her with that same fluid grace she'd noticed in the woods. Up close, in the cabin's intimate lighting, she could see him more clearly. His dark hair held hints of auburn, and his skin had an almost luminous quality that seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. "I wasn't expecting..." She gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "This, what were you expecting? A cave? Perhaps some skulls mounted on the walls?" Despite everything, Maya found herself almost smiling. Maybe a few cobwebs at least. Something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. It vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. He moved to a cabinet near the far wall, retrieving what looked like a crystal decanter filled with amber liquid. "You're not what I expected either," he said without turning around. "What did you expect?" Screaming, begging, the usual human responses to mortal terror. He poured himself a measure of whatever was in the decanter, but didn't drink. "Instead, you're making jokes about interior decorating." Maya's hands tightened on her wheelchair's armrests. The casual way he spoke about mortal terror sent ice through her veins, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact when he turned back to face her. "Maybe I'm in shock. Maybe." He studied her with those unsettling eyes. "Or maybe you're something else entirely." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Maya became acutely aware of how isolated they were, how utterly dependent she was on his mercy. The rational part of her mind catalogued potential weapons. A letter opener on the desk near the window, a heavy crystal paperweight, the fireplace poker. All useless to someone who couldn't stand, couldn't run, couldn't fight with anything approaching equality. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked finally. Kieran set down his untouched drink and moved closer. Maya fought the urge to roll her chair backward. Even seated, she had to crane her neck to meet his gaze, and the disparity in their positions felt deliberately calculated. "Because killing you in the woods would have been inconvenient." "Inconvenient how?" "Your scent." The words were barely above a whisper, but they hit her like a physical blow. "It's unusual." It would have lingered, drawn questions from others of my kind. Questions I'm not prepared to answer. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. My scent? He was close enough now that she could see the subtle, inhuman qualities she'd missed in the darkness. Canine teeth slightly too sharp, eyes that reflected light like a nocturnal predator's. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of something that might have been hunger. Most humans smell like prey, fear, sweat, the copper tang of blood waiting to be spilled. He paused, his gaze never leaving her face. You smell like rain before a storm. Like electricity and possibility. I don't understand. Neither do I. For the first time since they'd met, he sounded uncertain. And that makes you dangerous. Maya processed this, her analytical mind struggling to find stable ground in a world that had shifted fundamentally off its axis. Dangerous to who? To me, to my pack, to the careful balance we've maintained for centuries. He stepped back abruptly, as if her proximity was affecting him in ways he didn't like. There are laws among my kind, ancient protocols about humans who stray into our territory. The penalty for violation is always the same: death. Swift and final. His expression hardened again, the momentary vulnerability disappearing behind walls of ice. But something about you stays my hand. Some instinct older than law, older than reason. The implications of his words settled over her like a shroud. She was alive on borrowed time, her fate balanced on the knife's edge of his inexplicable restraint. What happens now? She asked. Kieran moved to the window, gazing out at the forest beyond. In profile, he looked like something carved from marble, beautiful, cold, and utterly inhuman. Now, he said, we discover whether your mysterious nature is salvation or damnation for us both. Outside, the wind picked up, sending tree branches scraping against the cabin's roof like skeletal fingers. Maya shivered, though the room was warm. Something told her that by morning nothing would ever be the same again. The ancient manor loomed before them like something pulled from a Gothic nightmare, its stone walls blackened by centuries of weather and shadow. Maya's wheelchair bumped along the uneven cobblestone path as Kieran pushed her toward the imposing entrance, his movements sharp and urgent. Every few seconds he would glance over his shoulder, scanning the tree line behind them with predatory alertness. Your friends really don't like visitors, Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. The pain in her leg had dulled to a persistent throb, but she could smell the metallic scent of blood even through the makeshift bandage. They're not my friends, Kieran replied tersely. And they're not coming for a social call. The massive front doors opened before they reached them, revealing a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a Victorian painting. Her dark hair was pulled into an elegant chignon, and her pale blue dress seemed to shimmer in the dim light. But it was her eyes that made Maya's breath catch. The same impossible silver as Kieran's, though where his burned with intensity, hers held an ancient weariness. You've brought her here, the woman said, her voice carrying a musical quality that somehow made Maya think of funeral dirges. After everything we discussed about maintaining the boundaries. Helena, not now. Kieran maneuvered Maya's chair through the doorway with practiced ease. The interior was all soaring ceilings and shadows, lit by candles that cast dancing patterns across tapestried walls. She's bleeding, and Marcus is already tracking the scent. Helena's nostrils flared slightly, and Maya watched something predatory flicker across her refined features before being quickly suppressed. Indeed, how unfortunate for all of us. She stepped aside, her gaze falling on Maya with an expression that wasn't quite hostile but certainly wasn't welcoming. Though I must say, this is quite irregular, even for you, Kieran. I didn't exactly plan this, he muttered, wheeling Maya deeper into what appeared to be a grand foyer. A sweeping staircase curved upward into darkness, and Maya caught glimpses of portraits lining the walls, faces pale and beautiful and somehow wrong, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Plans so rarely survive contact with the enemy, Helena observed, or in this case, contact with lost humans wandering where they shouldn't. Maya bristled at being discussed like she wasn't there. I'm not lost. My GPS just... Your GPS, Helena interrupted with a laugh like silver bells, doesn't account for territories that prefer to remain hidden. Technology has a way of malfunctioning here. Before Maya could ask what that meant, a thunderous crack echoed from somewhere outside the manor. The sound was followed by an inhuman howl that raised every hair on Maya's arms. Through the tall windows, she could see shapes moving between the trees, too large to be human, too fast to be anything natural. Kieran cursed under his breath and moved to peer through the heavy curtains. They're testing the perimeter. We have maybe 10 minutes before they decide to break the old accords entirely. The old accords that you've already violated by bringing her here? Helena's tone remained conversational, but Maya caught the steel underneath. Really, Kieran, sometimes your impulsiveness rivals that of a newborn. Would you rather I left her out there to be torn apart? I'd rather you had considered the consequences before playing hero. Helena glided closer to Maya's chair, her movements unnaturally fluid. Though I suppose the damage is done now, the question becomes what we do with our unexpected guest. Maya gripped the arms of her wheelchair, acutely aware that she was trapped in a conversation about her fate between two people who clearly weren't entirely human. Look, I appreciate the rescue, but if my being here is causing problems, I can just call someone to pick me up. I won't tell anyone about... Oh, my dear, Helena said softly, reaching out to touch Maya's cheek with fingers that were cold as winter stone. You sweet, naive little thing. You think this is the sort of secret you can simply promise to keep? Another howl split the night air, closer this time. Maya jerked away from Helena's touch, her pulse racing. What are you people? Kieran turned from the window, his silver eyes seeming to glow in the candlelight. For a moment, Maya saw something else flicker across his features. Something with too many teeth and too much hunger, the kind you run from, he said quietly, the kind your ancestors warned you about in stories around dying fires. Vampires, Maya whispered, the word falling from her lips like a stone into still water. Among other things, Helena confirmed with that same musical laugh. Welcome to Ravenshollow, dear. Do try not to bleed on the antique rugs. The scent of pine and morning dew couldn't mask the metallic tang that clung to Maya's clothes as she wheeled herself through the hospital's automatic doors. 3 days had passed since the woods, since him, and she still caught herself checking shadows for golden eyes that haunted her dreams. Maya Chen, you look like hell, Dr. Sarah Martinez called out from behind the nurse's station, her white coat pristine despite pulling a double shift. Please tell me you're not here for yourself. Maya forced a smile, grateful for the normalcy of her friend's concern. Just visiting Mrs. Patterson in 3B brought her some of those terrible romance novels she loves. Sarah's expression softened, but her medical eye remained sharp as it tracked the dark circles under Maya's eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly on her wheelchair's push rims. You sure you're okay? You've seemed off since you called in sick Monday. Off. That was one way to describe discovering vampires were real and having one save your life before vanishing into the night like some gothic fever dream. Maya had spent the past 3 days researching everything she could find about the local legends, the disappearances, the warnings about the deep woods. Most of it was nonsense, but enough pieces fit together to make her blood run cold. Just tired, Maya lied, heading toward the elevators. Haven't been sleeping well. The truth was, she barely slept at all. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that impossibly beautiful face streaked with blood, felt those powerful arms lifting her like she weighed nothing, heard that voice promising she was safe even as danger circled them in the darkness. Part of her wondered if she'd imagined it all, a hallucination brought on by blood loss and terror, but the scratches on her chair were real enough, and her torn jacket had disappeared entirely, as if someone wanted to erase any evidence of what had happened. Mrs. Patterson was delighted by the books, chattering about her grandson's upcoming wedding while Maya's mind wandered. Through the third-floor window, she could see the tree line in the distance, that dark wall of forest that had nearly claimed her life. Somewhere in those depths he was probably sleeping, if vampires actually slept during the day. The thought sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "You're not listening to a word I'm saying, dear," Mrs. Patterson said with knowing eyes. "Man trouble?" Maya laughed, despite herself. Something like that. After leaving the hospital, Maya found herself driving toward downtown instead of home, as if her subconscious had made a decision her rational mind wasn't ready for. She parked outside the Mystic Corner, the occult bookshop she'd discovered during her frantic internet research. The owner, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena Vasquez, had been surprisingly helpful when Maya called with academic questions about local vampire law. The shop smelled of sandalwood and old paper, crystals catching afternoon sunlight in rainbow fragments across the cluttered shelves. Elena emerged from the back room like she'd been expecting her, carrying a leather-bound journal that looked ancient enough to be legitimate. "Found something that might interest you," Elena said without preamble, setting the book on the counter. "This belonged to my great-grandmother. She documented supernatural encounters in this region for over 50 years. Maya's heart raced as she opened the journal, pages filled with careful handwriting in Spanish and English. Sketches of creatures with inhuman beauty and predatory grace filled the margins, but it was the map that made her breath catch. Someone had marked territories throughout the woods with different symbols, noting feeding grounds, safe passage routes, and in the deepest part of the forest, a single annotation, El Alpha, danger. "The Alpha," Elena translated, watching Maya's face carefully. "My great-grandmother wrote that he was different from the others, older, more powerful. She claimed he protected certain humans from his kind, though no one knew why." "What happened to her?" Maya asked, unable to look away from the detailed sketch of golden eyes above sharp cheekbones. "She died peacefully in her sleep at 93, which was remarkable considering how often she ventured into places decent people avoided." Elena leaned closer, lowering her voice, but she left instructions. "If anyone ever came asking about the Alpha specifically, I was to give them this." She handed Maya a small silver pendant on a delicate chain, the metal warm despite sitting in the cool shop. The design was simple but elegant, a crescent moon cradling a star, with symbols etched around the edges that seemed to shift in the light. "She called it Safe Passage," Elena explained. "Said if someone wore it in his territory, he would know they came seeking answers rather than trouble." Maya's fingers closed around the pendant, and for just a moment she could have sworn she felt something respond, a pulse of awareness that had nothing to do with her own heartbeat. In the distance, thunder rumbled despite the clear sky, and she knew with sudden certainty that some choices, once made, changed everything forever. She was going back to the woods. The scent hit Kieran like a physical blow the moment he stepped into the council chamber. Maya's blood, still fresh on his clothes, mixed with the ancient mustiness of the underground hall. 7 pairs of crimson eyes fixed on him as he entered, their owners arranged in a perfect semicircle around the obsidian table that had witnessed countless executions over the centuries. "You're late," Elder Cassandra's voice cut through the silence, each syllable dripping with barely contained fury. Her pale fingers drummed against the stone surface, the sound echoing like a death knell in the cavernous space. Kieran took his place at the head of the table, forcing his expression into the mask of cold indifference that had served him well for over 200 years. "I was dealing with the breach." "Ah, yes, the breach." Elder Marcus leaned forward, his silver hair catching the torchlight. "Tell us, Alpha, how exactly does one deal with a human who has seen our territory, witnessed our kind, and somehow lived to tell about it?" The question hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. Kieran could feel the weight of centuries of law pressing down on him, the unbreakable code that had kept their kind hidden since the Great Purges. No human who crossed into vampire territory could be allowed to leave, ever. "The threat has been neutralized," Kieran replied, each word carefully measured. Elder Cassandra's laugh was like breaking glass. "Neutralized? Is that what we're calling it now?" She rose from her seat, her black robes billowing around her skeletal frame. because our scouts report something quite different. They speak of a human girl, alive and whole, hidden away in the old groundskeeper's cottage. The other elders shifted in their seats, a predatory energy rippling through the chamber. Kieran felt his jaw clench despite his efforts to remain impassive. He should have known they would be watching. The council trusted no one, not even their own alpha. "The girl is incapacitated," he said. "She poses no threat." "No threat?" Elder Victor slammed his fist on the table, the sound reverberating through the stone walls. "She has seen our faces, breathed our air, walked on sacred ground. Every moment she draws breath is a moment our entire civilization hangs in the balance." Kieran's hands remained steady on the armrests of his chair, but inside, something primitive and fierce was stirring. The memory of Maya's touch, the way she had looked at him without fear, the sound of her heartbeat synchronizing with his own. It all crashed against the walls of duty and tradition that had defined his existence. "The law is clear," Elder Cassandra continued, beginning to pace around the table like a vulture circling carrion. "No exceptions, no mercy, no human can be permitted to carry our secrets into their world." "And yet," Elder Marcus interjected, his ancient eyes boring into Kieran's, "you hesitate. Why?" The question struck too close to the truth. Kieran could feel the invisible threads that had begun to weave themselves around his heart the moment Maya had stumbled into his territory. Something about her had called to the man he had been before the change, before the blood and the killing and the endless weight of command. "I don't hesitate," Kieran lied smoothly. "I consider all options before acting." "Options?" Elder Cassandra stopped directly behind his chair, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "There is only one option, Alpha. There has always been only one option." The chamber fell silent except for the distant drip of water somewhere in the depths below. Kieran could feel the expectation pressing against him from all sides, 7 ancient vampires waiting for him to confirm what they already knew had to happen. "You have until dawn," Elder Victor announced, his words final as a judge's gavel. "Dispose of the human, or we will do it ourselves." "And Alpha?" His smile revealed fangs that had tasted the blood of kings. "We won't be as gentle as you might have been." The threat was unmistakable, not just to Maya but to Kieran himself. Challenge the council directly, and he would find himself facing not just exile but execution. Even an alpha had limits to his power. One by one, the elders filed out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing in the stone corridors that led back to their various lairs. Soon only the torches remained as witnesses to Kieran's internal war. He sat alone in the gathering shadows, his mind racing through possibilities and finding none that didn't end in either Maya's death or his own. The smart choice, the safe choice, was obvious. One quick bite, one moment of pain, and this entire complication would disappear. But as he finally rose from his chair and made his way back toward the surface, toward the cottage where Maya lay sleeping, Kieran found himself wondering if some complications were worth dying for. The ancient oak's twisted roots created natural alcoves where Maya could rest her wheelchair, though nothing about this place felt restful. Shadows moved differently here, as if the darkness itself was alive and watching. She pulled her jacket tighter, trying to ignore the way her skin prickled with awareness. "Tell me about the bond," she said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since they'd stopped. "What exactly did you do to me?" Kieran stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid beneath his dark shirt. When he turned, his eyes held that familiar crimson glow that should have terrified her but instead sent heat spiraling through her chest. "I marked you," he said simply. "My blood, mixed with yours. It creates a connection that runs deeper than human understanding." "That's not an answer. That's vampire mysticism." Maya's voice carried an edge of frustration. "I can feel you in my head sometimes. Your emotions, your hunger. I need to understand what's happening to me." He moved closer, each step deliberate and predatory. "You want the truth? The bond means your life is tied to mine. Your heart beats in rhythm with my existence. If I die, you die. If you're in danger, I feel it like a blade through my chest. Maya's hands stilled on her wheelchair's armrests. You didn't ask permission. There wasn't time. His jaw clenched. Marcus's wolves were seconds from tearing you apart. I chose to save you. By damning me? By claiming you? The words hung between them like a challenge. Maya felt her pulse quicken, and she knew he could hear it, could probably smell the confusion of attraction and anger coursing through her veins. What does that mean exactly? Claimed. Kieran's laugh held no humor. It means every supernatural creature within 100 miles knows you belong to me. It means Marcus can't touch you without declaring war. It means you've made me a prisoner. The accusation cut through his explanation. It means I've made you mine. Before Maya could respond, a sound echoed through the trees, a howl that raised every hair on her arms. Kieran's head snapped toward the noise, his entire body coiling with tension. They've found us, he growled. Who? Marcus's scouts. We need to move, now. But as Kieran reached for her wheelchair, Maya grabbed his wrist. His skin was cold as marble, yet somehow her touch seemed to burn him. He froze, staring down at where her fingers circled his arm. I can't keep running without understanding, she said. This bond, does it go both ways? His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the monster facade cracked. She saw something raw and vulnerable beneath the predator's mask. Yes, he whispered, your pain becomes mine. Your fear, it's agony. And when you're close like this, his free hand lifted toward her face but stopped inches from her cheek. When you're close, the hunger changes into something far more dangerous. Another howl, closer this time. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, and she watched Kieran's pupils dilate as her fear flooded through their connection. We're going to die out here, she breathed. No, his voice carried absolute conviction. I've lived for 800 years. I've survived wars, plagues and enemies who make Marcus look like a petulant child. I will not let anything happen to you. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why does my life matter to you? Kieran's expression shifted, becoming almost gentle. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible above the wind through the trees. Because for 8 centuries I've felt nothing but hunger and rage. But when I look at you, he shook his head. When I look at you, I remember what it feels like to be human. The admission hit Maya like a physical blow. She searched his face, looking for deception, for manipulation. Instead, she found something that terrified her more than his fangs or his superhuman strength. She found sincerity. A branch snapped nearby, followed by the unmistakable sound of multiple footsteps moving through underbrush. Kieran's moment of vulnerability vanished, replaced by lethal focus. "Hold on," he commanded, gripping her wheelchair. "Wait." But they were already moving. Kieran pushed her chair with inhuman speed, weaving between trees with supernatural grace. Branches that should have caught her wheels seemed to bend away at the last second. The world blurred past in a kaleidoscope of shadow and starlight. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Snarls echoed through the darkness, accompanied by the distinctive crack of shifting bones that meant the wolves were changing form. Maya's knuckles went white as she gripped her armrests. The bond hummed between them, and she could feel Kieran's determination like a steel rod down her spine. Whatever else he might be, monster, killer, ancient predator, he meant what he'd said. He would die before letting Marcus's pack reach her. The question was whether that would be enough. The blood bond hummed between them like a live wire, and Maya could feel Kieran's presence even when he wasn't in the room. 3 days had passed since the ritual, 3 days of learning to navigate this strange new existence where her human heartbeat seemed to echo his immortal stillness. She wheeled herself through the corridors of his mansion, marveling at how the ancient stone walls no longer felt cold against her skin. Everything was sharper now, the whisper of fabric, the distant sound of wind through trees, the subtle shift of shadows as clouds passed overhead. The wheelchair that had once felt like a prison now seemed almost irrelevant compared to the supernatural awareness flooding her senses. Kieran found her in his library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes that spoke of vampire lore and territory disputes. He moved with that predatory grace she'd grown to recognize, but something was different. Tension radiated from him like heat. "You shouldn't be reading those," he said, though his voice lacked its usual commanding edge. Maya looked up from a particularly disturbing passage about blood debts and territorial violations. "Why? Because I might learn something you don't want me to know?" He was beside her chair in an instant, close enough that she could see the amber flecks in his dark eyes. The bond between them pulsed, carrying emotions she couldn't quite decipher: worry, anger, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Because knowledge has a price in our world," he said quietly, "and you've already paid too much." Before she could respond, a sound echoed through the mansion, the deep, resonant chime of bells that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Kieran's expression went cold, deadly. "What is that?" Maya asked, but she already knew from the fear suddenly coursing through their connection. "The conclave," Kieran said, moving away from her with supernatural speed. "They're calling for a formal hearing." Maya's newly enhanced senses picked up movement throughout the house. Vampires she hadn't even known were there, emerging from hidden passages and shadows. Kieran's people, she realized, his coven. A woman appeared in the doorway, tall and ethereal with silver hair that caught the lamplight. Her presence made Maya's skin crawl, though she couldn't say why. "Kieran," the woman said, her voice like silk over steel. "The council grows impatient. 3 days to present yourself and you're human." Maya bristled at the dismissive tone, but Kieran stepped protectively in front of her chair. "She's under my protection, Lydia. The bond guarantees." "The bond guarantees nothing if the council deems it invalid," Lydia interrupted. "You know the laws about unauthorized turnings, about territory violations." Her pale eyes fixed on Maya with predatory interest. "About damaged goods." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Damaged goods. She'd heard variations of that phrase her entire life, whispered behind hands at school, murmured by well-meaning relatives, implied by every pitying look from strangers. But hearing it here, in this place where she'd begun to feel powerful, where the bond with Kieran had made her feel whole, it cut deeper than ever before. Kieran's control shattered. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Maya watched in fascination and terror as his human facade fell away completely. His eyes went black, fangs extending as a growl rumbled from his chest that made the windows rattle. "Choose your next words very carefully," he said, and his voice carried the weight of centuries of absolute authority. "You're speaking about my mate." Lydia smiled, showing her own gleaming fangs. "Your mate? How interesting. I wasn't aware the bond could extend to—" She gestured vaguely at Maya's chair. "Well, the council will be fascinated to examine this anomaly." Maya felt something dark and fierce rising in her chest, powered by the bond, but entirely her own. She'd spent her life being underestimated, dismissed, treated like something broken that needed fixing or hiding. She was done. "I have a name," she said, her voice carrying new strength. "And I'm sitting right here." Both vampires turned to look at her, Lydia with surprise, Kieran with something that might have been pride. "My name is Maya Chen," she continued, wheeling forward until she was beside Kieran. "I'm not damaged, I'm not broken, and I'm certainly not goods to be evaluated by your council." The bond between her and Kieran blazed brighter, and she felt his power flowing through her, amplifying her own fierce determination. Lydia's smile widened, but her eyes remained cold. How delightfully spirited. "The council will enjoy breaking that fire." "Let them try," Maya said. Kieran's hand found her shoulder, his touch both reassuring and claiming. "When is the hearing?" "Tomorrow at moonrise," Lydia replied. "Don't be late. The council has already issued blood warrants for both of you should you choose to run." She vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the lingering scent of winter and threat. Maya looked up at Kieran, seeing her own determination reflected in his dark eyes. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The real battle was about to begin. The ancient stone chamber thrummed with energy as Maya's fingers traced the carved symbols on the wall, each touch sending jolts of electricity up her arms. The markings seemed to respond to her presence, glowing brighter with an ethereal blue light that cast dancing shadows across Dominic's sharp features. "This shouldn't be possible," he murmured, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and concern. "These runes have been dormant for centuries. Only those with—" "With what?" Maya interrupted, turning her wheelchair to face him fully. The light from the symbols continued to pulse behind her, creating an almost supernatural aura around her silhouette. Dominic's jaw clenched, his dark eyes reflecting an internal struggle she'd grown to recognize. He was weighing how much truth he could bear to share, how much reality she could handle. The careful distance he'd been maintaining since their kiss in the moonlight seemed to crumble as he stepped closer. Only those with ancient bloodlines can awaken them, bloodlines that predate the separation between our kinds. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Maya, what do you know about your family history?" Before she could answer, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. The stone floor beneath them vibrated, and dust rained down from the vaulted ceiling. Dominic's head snapped toward the entrance, his nostrils flaring as he caught a scent that made his entire body go rigid. "They've found us," he growled, his features beginning to shift subtly. The predator she'd glimpsed before was emerging, all sharp angles and barely contained violence. "Victor's scouts! They must have tracked your awakening of the runes." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "What does that mean?" "It means every vampire in a 50-mile radius now knows exactly what you are." Dominic moved with inhuman speed, positioning himself between her and the chamber entrance. "And they'll kill us both to claim you." The rumbling grew louder, accompanied by voices speaking in a language Maya didn't recognize but somehow understood. The words seemed to bypass her ears entirely, settling directly into her consciousness like drops of ice water. They spoke of power, of ancient promises, of blood debts that spanned millennia. "I can understand them," she whispered, terror and fascination warring in her voice. "How can I understand them?" Dominic's expression darkened further. "Because you're not just human, Maya. You never were." He knelt beside her wheelchair, his hands gentle despite the urgency radiating from every line of his body. "There's another way out, but you have to trust me completely. No questions, no hesitation." The voices were getting closer now, and Maya could hear the scrape of claws against stone. Her newly awakened senses picked up the metallic scent of old blood and something else, something that made her skin crawl with primitive fear. "What are you asking me to do?" "Let me carry you. There's a passage behind the altar that leads to the old sanctuary, but it's too narrow for your chair." His eyes met hers, vulnerable and fierce all at once. "I know what your independence means to you. I know what I'm asking." Maya stared at him, her mind racing. Everything about this moment went against her instincts for self-preservation and autonomy. But the approaching danger felt real in a way that made her bones ache, and the blue light from the runes was beginning to flicker erratically, as if responding to her emotional turmoil. "Promise me something," she said, reaching out to cup his face in her hands. His skin was cold, but somehow comforting. "Promise me you'll explain everything once we're safe. No more half-truths, no more protecting me from reality." "Maya, promise me, Dominic. Whatever I am, whatever this means, I have the right to know." The chamber entrance exploded inward in a shower of stone and ancient mortar. Dark shapes poured through the opening, their eyes gleaming red in the blue light of the runes. Victor's voice rose above the chaos, speaking words that made the air itself seem to writhe and twist. Dominic's transformation was instantaneous and breathtaking. His features sharpened to inhuman perfection, his canines elongated, and when he looked at her one last time before scooping her into his arms, his eyes had gone completely black. "I promise," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in her chest. "But right now, hold on tight." Maya wrapped her arms around his neck as he lifted her effortlessly from her wheelchair. The sensation of being carried should have made her feel helpless, but instead, pressed against Dominic's chest with supernatural strength surrounding her, she felt safer than she had since this nightmare began. He moved toward the altar with fluid grace, even as the pursuing vampires flooded into the chamber behind them. The runes on the walls pulsed one final time, their light reaching a crescendo that illuminated every corner of the ancient space. Then Dominic pressed against a hidden mechanism, and they plunged into darkness. The ancient grimoire felt heavier than it should have as Maya traced her fingers along the cracked leather binding. Dust motes danced in the pale morning light, filtering through the library's tall windows, and somewhere in the shadows between the towering shelves, she could hear Lucian moving with that predatory grace that made her pulse quicken. "Found something," she called softly, her voice echoing in the vast silence. He appeared beside her chair so suddenly that she startled, the book nearly slipping from her lap. Even after weeks in his presence, she still wasn't used to the way he moved, like liquid darkness given form. "The severance ritual," she read aloud, pointing to the elaborate script on the yellowed page. "It says here that a blood bond can be broken, but—" She paused, studying the intricate diagrams that accompanied the text. "The cost is severe." Lucian leaned closer, his cool breath ghosting across her neck as he read over her shoulder. The proximity sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with his supernatural chill. "What kind of cost?" Maya's finger traced the ancient words, translating the archaic language with growing unease. "The vampire loses their enhanced abilities, strength, speed, immortality. They become mortal." She looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of what he was thinking. "And the human? What about the human?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the tension coiled beneath the surface. "Memory loss, complete amnesia of everything supernatural they've encountered." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. They return to their normal life, but they forget everything, everyone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, matching the darkness settling over Maya's heart. "There's more," she whispered, turning the page. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the rest of the ritual's requirements. "It has to be performed during the new moon, when the barrier between worlds is thinnest. And it requires—" she swallowed hard. "It requires the willing sacrifice of what each party values most." Lucian straightened, his expression unreadable. "Maya—" A sharp crack echoed through the library as the massive front doors burst open. Maya spun her chair toward the sound, her heart hammering as three figures strode into the sanctuary. She recognized Marcus immediately, Lucian's lieutenant, his face grim with urgency. The other two were strangers, but the way they moved marked them clearly as vampires. "Forgive the intrusion," Marcus said, his eyes darting between Lucian and Maya, "but we have a problem." Lucian stepped protectively in front of Maya's chair, his entire demeanor shifting from contemplative to dangerous in the span of a heartbeat. "Speak." "The Council has issued a formal challenge to your leadership," one of the strangers announced. Maya noted the way his gaze lingered on her with obvious distaste. "They cite your compromised judgment regarding the human as grounds for removal." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Maya felt ice crystals forming along the edges of her wheelchair, and when Lucian spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of authority. "And you come as their messenger, Victor." The vampire called Victor smiled, revealing fangs like polished ivory. "I come as the one chosen to replace you, should you fail to meet their terms, which are: eliminate the human, sever the bond, and resume proper leadership of the coven." Victor's eyes flicked to Maya again. "Or face trial by combat within 3 nights." Shh. Maya's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair, knuckles white with tension. The grimoire slipped from her lap, landing on the floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo like a death knell. "The human has a name," Lucian said quietly, but his words carried deadly menace. "And she is under my protection." Victor laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Your protection means nothing if you're dead, old friend. The Council grows tired of your sentimentality. They remember when you were a proper predator." "I remember too," Lucian replied, and something in his tone made even Marcus step back. "Shall I remind you why they made me Alpha in the first place?" The threat hung in the air like a blade. Maya found herself holding her breath, acutely aware that she was witnessing a confrontation that could reshape the entire supernatural hierarchy. The power radiating from Lucian was palpable now, pressing against her consciousness like a living thing. Victor's confident smile faltered slightly. "3 nights, Lucian. Choose wisely." The 3 vampires departed as suddenly as they'd arrived, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and menace. Maya sat in stunned silence, processing the implications of what she'd just witnessed. Lucian remained motionless, staring at the doors through which his enemies had vanished. When he finally turned back to her, his expression was a mask of careful control. "Maya," he said softly, "we need to talk." But she was already reaching for the fallen grimoire, her mind racing with possibilities and desperate plans. 3 nights suddenly seemed like no time at all. The ancient stone chamber beneath the estate felt like a tomb, its walls carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering candlelight. Maya's wheelchair creaked against the uneven floor as Kieran guided her deeper into the underground sanctuary, past alcoves filled with artifacts she couldn't identify and didn't want to examine too closely. "The Council hasn't convened in 50 years, Kieran said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "They only gather when something threatens the very foundation of our kind." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "And that something is me. That something is us." His hand found her shoulder, a brief touch that steadied her more than she cared to admit. "What we've become together." The chamber opened into a vast circular hall, its center dominated by an obsidian table surrounded by 13 high-backed chairs. Only 7 were occupied, but the presence of those ancient vampires filled the space like a suffocating fog. Their eyes, some crimson, others gold, one pair an unsettling silver, fixed on Maya with predatory intensity. At the head of the table sat a woman whose beauty was so perfect it hurt to look at directly. Her platinum hair fell in waves past shoulders draped in midnight silk, and when she smiled, her fangs gleamed like polished ivory. "Serafina," Kieran breathed, and Maya caught the note of genuine fear in his voice. "My dear Kieran." Serafina's accent carried hints of languages long dead. "How refreshing to see you again. And this," her gaze slid to Maya like a blade across skin. "This is the little mortal who's caused such a delightful uproar." Maya forced herself to sit straighter, grateful for the wheelchair's support. She wouldn't cower before these creatures, no matter how her instincts screamed at her to flee. "I didn't ask for any of this." A bark of laughter came from a dark-skinned vampire whose scarred face told stories of countless battles. "The human speaks. How charming." "Silence, Marcus." Serafina's voice cut through the air like winter wind. "The child has more spine than most of our own kind." She rose from her chair with liquid grace, moving around the table until she stood before Maya. This close, her otherworldly beauty was even more overwhelming. "Tell me, little one, do you know what you've done?" "I saved his life," Maya said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "And he saved mine." "Saved?" Another vampire, this one pale as bone with eyes like black holes, leaned forward. "You've doomed him. Doomed us all. The bond between vampire and human is forbidden for good reason." Kieran stepped protectively closer to Maya's chair. "The bond wasn't intentional, Cassius. It formed naturally when you chose to feed from her directly instead of killing her as law demands." Serafina finished smoothly. "Yes, We're aware of the circumstances. The question now is what to do about it. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Maya's breath came out in visible puffs as the council members exchanged glances heavy with meaning she couldn't decipher. "There are precedents," said a red-haired vampire whose youthful appearance belied the ancient wisdom in her eyes. "The last such bond was broken in 1847. And how did that end, Lydia?" Kieran's voice carried a dangerous edge. Lydia's smile was razor-sharp. Both parties died, of course, most unpleasantly. Maya's blood turned to ice. What exactly is this bond everyone keeps talking about? Serafina circled behind Maya's wheelchair like a shark scenting blood. "You truly don't know? How delicious." "The bond, my dear, is a metaphysical connection between vampire and human that occurs in perhaps one case in 1,000. It links your life forces, your emotions, your very souls if you believe in such things." "What Serafina isn't telling you," Kieran said, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury, "is that the bond can evolve. It can make you stronger, Maya. It can turn her into something that should never exist," Marcus snarled, slamming his fist on the obsidian table. "Something neither fully human nor vampire, an abomination that threatens the natural order." Maya felt the truth of their words resonating in her bones, in the new strength she'd noticed in her arms, in the way her senses had sharpened since that night in the woods. The bond was changing her, but into what? Serafina leaned down until her lips nearly brushed Maya's ear. "The question, little mortal, is whether you're brave enough to embrace what you're becoming. Because the alternative—" She straightened, her smile cold as winter starlight. "Well, let's just say there are fates far worse than death." The council members began to murmur among themselves in languages Maya didn't recognize, their voices weaving together into an ominous symphony. Whatever decision they reached would determine not just her fate, but Kieran's as well. And deep in her chest, where the bond pulsed like a second heartbeat, Maya felt something dark and powerful stirring to life. The ancient stone walls of the sanctuary seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat as Maya pressed her palms against the cold surface. 3 days had passed since Kieran's transformation, and the bond between them had grown stronger with each sunrise. She could feel him even now, somewhere in the depths of the catacombs below, wrestling with the hunger that threatened to consume what remained of his humanity. "You shouldn't be here alone." Lydia's voice cut through the silence like a blade. The vampire elder emerged from the shadows, her silver hair gleaming in the candlelight. "The others are growing restless. They whisper that you've made him weak." Maya turned her wheelchair to face the woman who had become both ally and adversary. "And what do you think?" Lydia's laugh was bitter. "I think you've made him dangerous in ways none of us anticipated." She moved closer, her footsteps eerily silent on the stone floor. "The blood bond you share, it's changing him, changing both of you." A tremor ran through Maya's body, and she gripped the armrests of her chair. The strange sensations had been increasing lately, moments where she could swear she felt Kieran's fangs in her own mouth, tasted copper on her tongue when she hadn't shed a drop of blood. "Tell me what's happening to me," Maya demanded. Before Lydia could answer, a commotion erupted from somewhere deep within the sanctuary. Shouts echoed through the corridors, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. Maya's heart clenched as she recognized the anguish in one particular roar. Kieran had lost control again. She spun her chair toward the sound, but Lydia blocked her path. "You'll only make it worse," the elder warned. "When he's like this, the sight of you drives him to madness. The hunger and the bond create a feedback loop that—" "Get out of my way!" Maya's voice carried a strange resonance that made Lydia's eyes widen. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and frost began forming on the nearby surfaces. "Impossible," Lydia breathed. "You're manifesting vampiric abilities, but you're still human, still mortal." She studied Maya with newfound wariness. "What exactly are you?" Maya didn't have time to ponder the question. Another crash shook the sanctuary, closer this time. She could feel Kieran's pain as if it were her own, a burning agony that threatened to tear her apart from the inside. Whatever was happening between them, she was the only one who could reach him when the darkness took hold. She pushed past Lydia, her enhanced strength surprising them both. The wheels of her chair seemed to glide over the stone, as if gravity itself bent to her will. She followed the destruction through twisting passages she had memorized over the past few days, past cells that had been ripped open like tin cans. She found him in the deepest chamber, surrounded by the remnants of what had once been reinforced steel bars. Kieran crouched in the center of the devastation, his body racked with violent shudders. His skin had taken on an alabaster pallor, and when he lifted his head, his eyes blazed with an inner fire that spoke of barely contained hunger. Maya. Her name escaped his lips like a prayer and a curse combined. You need to leave, now. I can smell your blood, hear your heartbeat, and I'm so hungry I can barely think. She moved closer instead of retreating, each revolution of her wheels deliberate and steady. Look at me, Kieran. Really look. He raised his head fully, and she saw the exact moment when surprise replaced the feral hunger in his expression. The frost that had begun in the upper chamber now spread from her hands, crystalline patterns racing across the stone walls and floor. Her breath misted in the suddenly frigid air, and when she spoke, her voice carried an otherworldly echo. I don't know what I am, she said, reaching out to touch his face. Her fingers left trails of ice against his fevered skin, but I know what we are together. The contact sent shockwaves through both of them. Kieran's vampiric nature recoiled from the cold that emanated from her touch, but the bond between them sang with recognition and relief. The hunger that had been driving him to madness began to recede, replaced by something else, a different kind of craving that had nothing to do with blood. The prophecy, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Lydia mentioned it once, a convergence of ice and shadow, mortality and immortality. I thought it was just another vampire legend. Maya felt the truth of it resonating in her bones. Whatever ancient magic had created the blood bond between them, it was transforming her into something unprecedented, something that could stand as his equal in a world that recognized only predators and prey. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind them, Lydia and others approaching to assess the damage. Maya knew their time was running short. The Vampire Council would demand answers neither of them possessed, and the fragile peace of the sanctuary was about to shatter like glass. The ancient oak's twisted roots formed a natural amphitheater around Maya as she pressed her back against its massive trunk. Every shadow seemed to writhe with hidden menace, every whisper of wind through the leaves carrying the promise of death. The Crimson Conclave had found her sanctuary, and their voices echoed through the moonlit grove like a funeral dirge. Come out, little blood singer. Seraphina's voice drifted on the night air, honeyed and venomous. Your protector isn't here to save you now. Maya's fingers tightened around the silver pendant Kieran had pressed into her palm before he'd vanished into the darkness to hunt Victor's remaining loyalists. The metal burned against her skin, a reminder that she was more than the helpless human they believed her to be. The power thrumming through her veins had been growing stronger each day, fed by her bond with Kieran and something deeper, something that terrified even the ancient vampires who stalked her now. A branch snapped to her left. Maya's head whipped toward the sound, catching a glimpse of crimson eyes before they melted back into shadow. They were toying with her, circling like predators savoring the hunt. Her wheelchair sat abandoned 20 feet away, its metal frame gleaming mockingly in the moonlight where she'd left it after discovering she could walk, could run, when the power flowed through her. The council grows impatient, another voice called out. This one belonging to Marcus, Seraphina's lieutenant. They want to examine your unique gifts before they decide whether you're an asset or a threat to our kind. Maya almost laughed at the bitter irony. For weeks she'd felt powerless, dependent on Kieran's protection, but now she understood the truth. The council didn't fear her because she was weak. They feared her because she was something unprecedented, a human whose blood could entrance vampires, whose very presence could tip the balance of power that had existed for millennia. "I know what you're thinking." Serafina materialized from behind a nearby tree, her porcelain features twisted into a predatory smile. "That your alpha will come charging through those woods to rescue his precious mate. But Kieran is occupied. Victor's followers are proving surprisingly resourceful in their final stand." The words hit Maya like physical blows, but she forced herself to remain still. Kieran had taught her to read the micro-expressions that betrayed a vampire's intentions, and she caught the slight tightening around Serafina's eyes. Uncertainty, fear even. Whatever was happening in the deeper parts of the territory, it wasn't going according to the Conclave's plans. "You're lying," Maya said quietly, pushing herself upright against the tree trunk. The bark bit into her palms, grounding her as power coursed through her legs, making them steady and strong. "If you had taken Kieran, you would have brought proof." Serafina's smile faltered for just a moment, before reshaping itself into something more dangerous. "Clever little mortal. No wonder our alpha is so attached. It will make breaking that bond all the more satisfying." Maya felt the familiar surge of protective fury that came whenever someone threatened what she and Kieran had built together. The pendant at her throat began to glow, silver light spilling between her fingers as she gripped it tighter. The vampires surrounding her took an involuntary step backward, their confident facades cracking. "You feel it, don't you?" Maya stepped away from the tree, moving with newfound grace toward the center of the clearing. "The power that shouldn't exist. The thing that makes your ancient instincts scream warnings you don't understand," Marcus hissed, fangs extending as his face shifted into its more monstrous aspect. "Enough games. Take her." But as the vampires moved to close the circle, Maya released her hold on the careful control Kieran had helped her build. The pendant erupted with silver fire, and the power that had been building inside her for weeks finally broke free. Light cascaded from her skin, turning her hair to molten gold and her eyes to burning stars. The vampires stumbled backward, hands raised to shield their faces from radiance that hurt to look upon. Maya felt the transformation rippling through her, changing something fundamental in her very cells. She was no longer entirely human, but she wasn't vampire either. She was something new, something that had never existed before in the long history of their kinds. "I am not your victim," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ancient oak's leaves tremble. "I am not your prize to be claimed or your weapon to be wielded. I am Maya Sinclair, mate to Kieran Blackthorn, and I choose my own destiny." The silver light pulsed outward in concentric waves, and where it touched the vampires, they screamed, not in pain, but in recognition of a power that predated their own dark gifts, a power that remembered when the world was young and magic flowed freely through mortal veins. In the distance, Maya heard the sound of running footsteps crashing through the underbrush, and her heart soared. Kieran was coming, drawn by the beacon of her unleashed power. But for the first time since entering this dangerous world, Maya knew she didn't need rescuing. She had become something worth fearing. The ancient ritual chamber beneath Kyle's mansion thrummed with power as Maya positioned herself at the center of the blood-carved circle. Candles flickered around the stone walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with anticipation. She could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders, the whispers of every vampire who had attempted this transformation echoing in the darkness. "You certain?" Kyle's voice was barely above a whisper, his usual commanding presence fractured by uncertainty. He stood at the chamber's edge, silver chains wrapped around his wrists, insurance against the monster he might become if the ritual went wrong. Maya met his crimson gaze steadily. "I've never been more certain of anything." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Terror coursed through her veins like ice water, but beneath it burned something fiercer: love, determination, and the desperate need to protect the man who had become her entire world. She wouldn't let Marcus destroy what they'd built together. Elena emerged from the shadows, her face grave as she carried the obsidian chalice. Ancient runes glowed along its surface, pulsing in rhythm with Maya's heartbeat. The blood moon reaches its zenith in minutes. Once we begin, there's no turning back. I know. Maya's fingers trembled as she accepted the chalice. Inside, Kael's blood swirled like liquid starlight, beautiful and terrifying. What do I need to do? Drink, and open your mind to the transformation. But Maya, Elena's hand closed over hers, the pain will be unlike anything you've experienced. Your human body will fight this change. Some don't survive the breaking. Through their bond, Maya felt Kael's anguish spike. She turned to find him straining against his chains, his control fracturing. I should stop this, he growled. I can't lose you to my own selfish needs. This isn't about your needs. Maya's voice rang with conviction. This is about our future, about being strong enough to stand together against whatever comes next. As if summoned by her words, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the mansion above them. Marcus had found them. He's here, Elena hissed, her fangs extending. The protective wards are failing. The sound of splintering wood crashed down from the upper levels, followed by inhuman roars and the clash of battle. Kael's vampires were buying them time, but Maya knew it wouldn't be enough. Now or never, she whispered, raising the chalice to her lips. The blood was warm, tinged with copper, and something indefinably wild. Power flooded her system immediately, burning through her veins like molten silver. Maya gasped, the chalice slipping from her nerveless fingers to shatter against the stone floor. Fire. Everything was fire. Her spine arched as the transformation began, every cell in her body screaming as vampire blood rewrote her DNA. Through their bond, she felt Kael's agony. He was experiencing every moment of her pain, magnified by his helplessness. Maya! His roar shook the chamber as he fought against the chains. Silver smoke rose from his wrists where the metal burned his flesh, but he didn't stop struggling. The chamber door exploded inward. Marcus stood silhouetted in the doorway, his usually perfect appearance disheveled from battle. Blood, not his own, stained his expensive suit. Behind him, the sounds of fighting had gone ominously quiet. How touching, he sneered, taking in the scene. The crippled human thinks she can become one of us. Rage gave Maya strength. She forced herself upright despite the agony coursing through her body, meeting Marcus's contemptuous gaze. I'm not human anymore. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps even fear. The scent of her changing blood must have reached him because his nostrils flared and his fangs descended. Impossible. The transformation takes hours to complete. Not for her, Elena said fiercely. She's Kael's true mate. The bond accelerates everything. Marcus lunged forward, claws extended, but Maya was already moving. The wheelchair that had defined her human existence became a weapon as she spun it with impossible speed, catching him across the chest. Supernatural strength flooded her limbs as the vampire blood claimed her completely. She felt the moment her heart stopped beating, then started again with a different rhythm entirely. Her senses exploded. She could hear conversations 3 floors above, smell the unique scent signature of every vampire in the mansion, see details in the darkness that had been invisible moments before. Most importantly, she could feel Kael's presence like a blazing star in her consciousness, their bond now unbreakable. Free him, she commanded Elena, never taking her eyes off Marcus as he picked himself up from the floor. The silver chains fell away with a musical chime. Kael was beside her instantly, his relief and pride washing over her in waves through their enhanced connection. Together? He murmured. Maya smiled, fangs gleaming in the candlelight. Always. Marcus circled them like a predator, but Maya could smell his uncertainty now. Everything had changed. She was no longer the helpless human he'd planned to use against Kael. She was something entirely new. The ancient cathedral's stone walls seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as Maya's wheelchair rolled across the cracked marble floor. Shadows danced in the flickering candlelight, and she could feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes watching her every movement. The conclave had assembled, and their collective presence made the air thick with supernatural tension. Lucien walked beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, but she could sense the rigid control he was maintaining. Every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring, ready to unleash devastation if any of the assembled vampires made a move against her. "The Alpha brings his pet human before us," sneered Councillor Vex, her crimson lips curving into a cruel smile. "How domesticated you've become, Lucien." "Choose your words carefully, Vex." Lucien's voice carried the promise of violence. "Maya is under my protection, and I will not tolerate disrespect." Elder Thorn stepped forward from the semicircle of vampires, his ancient face carved with centuries of authority. "Protection is precisely why we're here, young Alpha. Your attachment to this mortal has compromised our entire coven. The hunters grow bolder by the day, and they follow her scent right to our door." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but she refused to show fear. She'd come too far to crumble now. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But I won't be treated like some bargaining chip either." A ripple of dark laughter echoed through the cathedral. Councillor Dmitri materialized from the shadows, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. "The little mortal has spirit. I can see why you're fond of her, Lucien. But fondness doesn't change the fact that she's a liability we can no longer afford." "She's not just mortal anymore," Lucien said, his eyes blazing silver in the candlelight. "The bond we share has changed her. She can sense us, track us, understand us in ways no human should be able to." Maya felt the truth of his words resonate through her bones. Ever since that night when Lucien's blood had saved her life, she'd been different. Her senses were sharper, her intuition heightened. She could feel the supernatural energy that radiated from each vampire in the room, could taste their individual essences on the air. "Precisely the problem," Elder Thorn intoned. "A human with vampire abilities, but no vampire loyalty. She's an abomination, a walking violation of the natural order." The word abomination hit Maya like a physical blow, but before she could respond, the cathedral doors exploded inward. Armed figures in black tactical gear poured through the entrance, weapons raised and silver bullets gleaming in the candlelight. "Hunter raid!" Someone screamed, but the vampires were already moving. Chaos erupted as supernatural beings clashed with human hunters. Lucien spun Maya's wheelchair behind a massive stone pillar, his fangs extended and eyes blazing with protective fury. "Stay down," he commanded, then launched himself into the fray with lethal grace. Maya watched in horrified fascination as the battle unfolded around her. Vampires moved like liquid death, faster than human eyes could track, but the hunters were prepared. Silver nets flew through the air, and the acrid smell of burning vampire flesh filled her nostrils as blessed weapons found their marks. A hunter broke through the melee, heading straight for Maya's hiding spot. She saw the recognition in his eyes, the cold calculation as he raised his crossbow. This wasn't random violence, they'd come specifically for her. Time seemed to slow as the hunter's finger tightened on the trigger. Maya felt something surge within her, a power she'd never accessed before. The silver bolt left the crossbow, but instead of piercing her heart, it stopped mid-air, suspended by invisible force. The hunter's eyes widened in shock as Maya raised her hand, and she felt the bolt's trajectory reverse. It flew back toward him with supernatural speed, but Lucien appeared between them like an avenging angel, catching the projectile inches from the hunter's throat. "She's mine to protect," Lucien snarled, then snapped the hunter's neck with casual efficiency. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When the last hunter fell, the cathedral was eerily quiet except for the drip of blood on ancient stone. Elder Thorn emerged from the shadows, his robes torn but his expression grimly satisfied. "Well," he said, looking directly at Maya, "that was illuminating." Maya realized that every surviving vampire was staring at her with a mixture of fear and fascination. She'd moved that crossbow bolt with her mind, had wielded power that shouldn't exist in any human. The question now, Thorn continued, is whether you're our salvation or our destruction. Lucian moved to Maya's side, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwined, and she felt strength flow between them, not just his supernatural power, but something new, something that belonged to both of them. Maybe, Maya said quietly, I'm something else entirely. The ancient ritual circle pulsed with crimson light as Maya's blood dripped onto the obsidian altar. Each drop seemed to awaken something primal in the carved stone, making the symbols glow brighter with every passing second. Kieran stood behind her, his hands trembling as he held the ceremonial blade that had just opened the small cut on her palm. Are you certain about this? His voice was barely a whisper, but Maya could hear the centuries of anguish threaded through those words. Once we begin, there's no turning back. The blood bond will change you in ways we can't predict. Maya turned her wheelchair to face him, her green eyes fierce with determination. I've never been more certain anything in my life. We've come too far to let fear stop us now. The council chamber around them seemed to hold its breath. Elder Cassius watched from the shadows, his ancient face unreadable. Even he had admitted this ritual was beyond his experience, a desperate gambit to merge human and vampire essence without destroying either. The forbidden texts spoke of it only in whispers, calling it the Crimson Unity, a bonding so complete it created something entirely new. Kieran's fangs extended involuntarily as the scent of Maya's blood filled the air. Every instinct screamed at him to drink, to claim, to possess. But this required far more control than simple feeding. This required him to share his very soul. The connection is forming, Maya gasped, feeling warmth spread up her arm from the cut. It wasn't painful, quite the opposite. It felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. I can feel you, Kieran. Your thoughts, your memories. Images flashed through her mind. Kieran as a human prince, the night he was turned, centuries of loneliness and bloodshed. But underneath it all, she felt something else, a gentleness he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. The man who saved wounded animals in secret, who'd spent decades learning to heal rather than harm. Kieran staggered as Maya's memories flooded into him. Her childhood before the accident, the day she lost the use of her legs, years of fighting to prove her worth to a world that saw only limitations. But more than that, he felt her indomitable spirit, the fire that burned so bright it could illuminate even his darkness. The transformation is beginning, he said, wonder creeping into his voice. Your heartbeat, it's changing. Maya looked down at her hands. Her skin seemed to shimmer, taking on an ethereal quality. She could feel power coursing through her veins, but it wasn't the cold hunger of vampirism. It was something warmer, more balanced, life and death intertwining rather than one consuming the other. Can you feel your legs? Kieran asked, kneeling beside her chair. Maya concentrated and gasped. Sensation was returning, not fully human sensation, but something new. She could feel the earth beneath the castle, the ancient magic that flowed through these mountains like veins of light. When she focused on her legs, they responded with a tingling warmth she hadn't felt in years. It's working, she breathed, attempting to stand. Her legs trembled, but held her weight for several precious seconds before she sank back into the wheelchair. Not completely healed, but changed, stronger. The ritual circle blazed brighter, and suddenly Kieran cried out in pain. Dark veins were spreading across his skin, but instead of the corruption they'd feared, they pulsed with golden light. His fangs retracted, and when he looked up at Maya, his eyes held flecks of warm brown among the usual silver. What's happening to you? Maya reached for him, her touch cooling the fire in his veins. I don't know, he admitted, examining his hands. I can still feel the vampire in me, but it's quieter, like it's sharing space with something else. Elder Cassius stepped forward, his expression awed. The prophecy, he whispered. The lost verses spoke of this. When shadow and light unite, when strength is found in perceived weakness, a new balance will be born. The ritual circle's light began to fade, leaving them in the soft glow of candlelight. Maya and Kieran stared at each other, both forever changed. She was no longer fully human. Her eyes now held silver flecks that matched his, and she could sense things beyond normal perception. He was no longer purely monster. Warmth had returned to his touch, and the bloodlust that had defined him for centuries felt muted, manageable. "What are we now?" Maya asked, her voice full of wonder rather than fear. Kieran took her hand, marveling at how perfectly their energies synchronized. Something new, something the world has never seen. Outside the castle, storm clouds gathered, as if sensing the shift in the supernatural balance. Their enemies would come, vampires who saw Kieran's transformation as weakness, humans who would fear Maya's new nature. But together, they had become something neither side could have anticipated. The real test of their unity was about to begin. The ancient crypt beneath the mansion trembled as Lucian's transformation reached its peak. Maya watched in horrified fascination as his humanity dissolved completely, replaced by something primordial and terrifying. His eyes had become twin voids of silver fire, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "The blood bond cannot be severed by death," he said, advancing on Victor with predatory grace. "You should have remembered that before you tried to claim what is mine." Victor's confident smirk faltered as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. The ritual he'd performed was designed to break the connection between Maya and Lucian, but instead it had amplified it beyond anything either of them had experienced. Maya could feel Lucian's rage coursing through her veins like liquid lightning, and with it came a strength she'd never possessed. "Impossible," Victor breathed, backing toward the stone altar where Maya was bound. The ancient texts were written by fools who never understood true bonding. Lucian cut him off. His form seemed to blur and shift, moving between shadow and substance. "Maya, can you hear me?" She nodded, though speaking felt like swallowing glass. The silver chains binding her to the altar were burning through her skin, but the pain felt distant now, overshadowed by the power flowing between them. "Trust me," Lucian whispered, and she felt his words echo inside her mind. "One last time." Victor raised his hands, dark energy crackling between his fingers. "If I cannot have the power, then neither can you. I'll destroy her before I let you." He never finished the sentence. Maya felt something snap inside her chest, not painful but liberating, like chains breaking free. The silver bonds holding her crumbled to dust, and she found herself actually standing, on legs that shouldn't have supported her weight, but somehow did. The wheelchair she'd depended on for years sat empty behind her, a relic of limitations that no longer applied. The bond with Lucian hadn't just healed her spirit, it had transformed her body in ways that defied explanation. Victor's spell struck her full in the chest, but instead of destroying her, the dark energy seemed to be absorbed and redirected. She felt it flow through her and into Lucian, who caught it and twisted it back toward its sender with devastating force. The elder vampire's scream echoed through the crypt as his own power turned against him. His carefully maintained human facade cracked and peeled away, revealing something ancient and withered beneath. Centuries of stolen life began to catch up with him all at once. "You don't understand what you've done," Victor gasped, his voice growing weaker. "The Council will never accept this. They'll hunt you both to the ends of the earth." Maya walked toward him on steady legs, marveling at each step. "Let them come," she said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "They'll find we're not easy prey." Lucian appeared beside her, his transformation ebbing but his power still radiating in waves. "The old ways are ending, Victor. What Maya and I have created is something new, something the Council's ancient laws cannot touch." Victor's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "The prophecy," he whispered. "The union that would change everything. I thought it was just mythology." "Myths have power when people believe in them strongly enough," Maya said. She could feel knowledge flowing into her mind, not just Lucian's memories, but something deeper, ancestral wisdom that belonged to both human and vampire kind. and some myths are simply truths waiting for the right moment to be born. The elder vampire's form was dissolving now, centuries of borrowed time finally claiming their due. "You have no idea what forces you've set in motion," he said with his last breath. "The council, the hunters, the old families, they'll all unite against you." "Then we'll face them together," Lucian replied, taking Maya's hand. The simple touch sent sparks of energy between them, visible as threads of silver light in the dim crypt. As Victor's remains crumbled to dust, the underground chamber began to shake more violently. The ritual had destabilized more than just the magical bindings. The entire foundation of the mansion was collapsing. "We need to leave," Lucian said urgently, but Maya was already ahead of him. "The others first," she insisted, thinking of Elena and the servants who'd been caught in Victor's web. "We don't leave anyone behind." They moved through the crumbling mansion with inhuman speed, gathering the survivors and leading them to safety. As they emerged into the pre-dawn darkness, Maya turned back to watch the ancient structure collapse in on itself. Somewhere in that rubble lay the remains of Victor and his twisted experiments, but also the old limitations that had defined her entire life. Lucian's hand found hers again as the dust settled. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked softly. Maya looked at him, then at the horizon where the first hints of sunrise were beginning to appear. For the first time in her life, the future felt limitless. "I'm ready for anything," she whispered back, "as long as we face it together." The ancient stone chamber trembled as Maya's power surged through her, silver light cascading from her fingertips like liquid starlight. The Council of Elders recoiled, their pale faces twisted in shock as centuries-old tapestries burst into flames around them. "Impossible," Elder Thorn whispered, his crimson eyes wide with terror. "The bloodline was severed. We made certain—" "You made certain of nothing," Maya said, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that made the very foundations of the underground stronghold shudder. Behind her, Kieran stood ready to strike, his fangs bared and muscles coiled like a predator prepared for the hunt. But this fight belonged to her. The silver wheelchair she'd been bound to lay twisted and melted, its metal frame unable to contain the raw magic flowing through her. She stood now on legs that had been broken and useless for years, feeling strength course through every fiber of her being. The ancient vampire blood that had always run dormant in her veins had finally awakened, triggered by Kieran's desperate bite 3 nights ago when the council had first captured them. "You hunted my grandmother," Maya continued, taking a step forward. Each footfall sent ripples of power across the stone floor. "You murdered my mother, and you would have killed me too if you'd known what I truly was." Elder Morgana, the eldest of the council, raised her gnarled hands in a gesture that should have bound Maya in chains of shadow. Instead, the dark magic simply dissolved against her radiant aura. The Daywalker prophecy speaks of destruction, of the end of vampire rule. You cannot be allowed to— "The prophecy speaks of balance," Kieran interjected, moving to stand beside Maya. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "Something you've forgotten in your thirst for absolute power." Maya felt his strength flowing into her, amplifying her own abilities. Together, they were something the vampire world had never seen before, a bonded pair of Alpha and Daywalker, darkness and light in perfect harmony. "For centuries, you've ruled through fear," Maya said, addressing the 5 elders who cowered before them. "You've turned vampires against humans, created wars that served no purpose except to maintain your control. But the old ways are ending." Elder Cassius, the youngest of the council at barely 400 years old, stepped forward with desperate courage. "You would destroy us all. Without the council, vampire society will crumble into chaos." "No," Maya replied, her silver light pulsing brighter. "Without the council, vampires will finally be free to choose their own paths, to live alongside humans instead of hiding from them, to love without fear of persecution." She thought of Sarah, her best friend who had accepted the truth about vampires without hesitation, of Dr. Harrison, who had helped treat Kieran's wounds without asking questions. of all the humans who deserved to know they weren't alone in the universe. The chamber wall behind the elders suddenly exploded inward, revealing dozens of vampires from Kieran's pack. They poured through the breach, led by Marcus and Elena, their eyes blazing with righteous fury. The council's own guards, faced with overwhelming odds, began laying down their weapons. "This is not victory," Elder Thorn spat, even as Elena's claws pressed against his throat. "This is the beginning of a war that will consume everything." "The war began centuries ago," Kieran said coldly, "when you decided that power mattered more than truth, when you convinced our kind that isolation was strength. Today, we end it." Maya raised her hand, and the silver light began to coalesce into something solid, a crown of pure energy that hovered above her palm. The crown of eternity, she realized, the legendary artifact that had supposedly been lost when the first Daywalker died. It hadn't been lost at all. It had been waiting. "I claim the right of succession," she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber and beyond, carried by ancient magic to every vampire in the realm, by blood, by power, and by choice. The council's reign is over. The crown settled onto her head, and Maya felt the weight of leadership, of responsibility, of hope. She looked at Kieran, seeing pride and love blazing in his dark eyes, and knew they would face whatever came next together. Elder Morgana laughed bitterly. "You think this ends with us? There are others, older things that sleep beneath the earth. Your revolution will wake them, and when they rise..." "When they rise," Maya interrupted, "they'll find a world where vampires and humans stand united, where love has triumphed over fear. And if they seek to return us to the old darkness, they'll discover that some monsters are worth becoming to protect what matters." The silver light expanded, washing over every vampire in the chamber, marking them with her blessing. The age of hiding was over. The age of harmony had begun, and in Kieran's arms, Maya finally understood what it meant to be both monster and savior, both ending and beginning.